Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in Washington, D.C. on a two-day visit to hold high-stakes talks with U.S. President Donald Trump in the face of concerns in New Delhi over Washington's new America First trade agenda, as well as its policy on immigration. The Prime Minister will be hosted by the U.S. President today in what would be the first bilateral talks between the two leaders after Trump assumed presidency for a second term last month. Now, India-US Comprehensive Global Strategic Partnership is on agenda as per a tweet by Prime Minister Modi. Braving freezing temperatures and rain, the community members gathered at Blair House, where Prime Minister Modi will be staying, welcoming him with slogans of Bharat Mata Ki Jai, Vande Mataram and Modi Modi as they wave the Indian flag and the American flag. But Trump's tariff policy is sending shockwaves across the world. Prime Minister Modi's key priority is likely to be to preempt any punitive trade action by Washington against India, and this includes the reciprocal tariffs that Donald Trump has been talking about. Let's take a look at what seems to be on Modi's agenda over the next 2 days, beginning today. Remember, he has already had a meeting with Tulsi Gabbard, but that meeting with Donald Trump is awaited. First on the agenda, trade pact with the United States in a bid to avoid high tariffs. Then Prime Minister is also likely to negotiate the trade tariffs imposed on steel and aluminum imports into the US as high as 25%. In addition to this, preempting reciprocal tariffs that President Donald Trump has been talking about could be on agenda for Prime Minister Modi. And then, of course, in the interest of overall economic growth of both the regions, expanding trade basket beyond the $130 billion as of last year that India and US enjoy, and ramping up India-US cooperation across sectors including energy, defense and technology could be on the agenda. And keeping the economics aside, Prime Minister Modi is also likely to talk against the mistreatment of Indian devotees. Now, remember, I just told you the bilateral trade between India and US was at around $130 billion last year, with India enjoying a trade surplus. If Modi wants to keep things his way, he would like that surplus to continue, but we really don't know which side the talks are going to turn. Joining me to discuss this and more today, I have with me Vivek Kumar, economist at Quantico, and Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist at Nikore Associates. Good morning, Vivek and Mithali. Thank you for joining us on this very important big story that we are tracking today. Prime Minister Modi is in the US, likely to meet Donald Trump. What's going to happen on the tariff front? Vivek, I want to understand from you, what should be India's priorities?
Hi, good morning, and thanks for having me on the show. Well, India has already displayed the intent via the union budget. So you could say that we've taken a preemptive move already. The custom duties were, to a large extent, at least some of the low volume items that US has been talking about, they've been reduced. And if you track the average rate of customs or the average rate of duties, there has been almost a 1 percentage point decline from 11.6% to 10.5%. So to some extent, you could say that we've set the ball rolling already. And now with the 2 day visit on, the priorities are pretty clear. You said it yourself that defense, technology, and energy. So defense, the first round of talks has already happened, I believe, and this is where I think the broader spectrum or the broader canvas that PM Modi would be probably targeting is to avoid getting into a clash of tariffs, something that is currently seen in case of China and US, because imposing tariffs or a tariff-led trade war is clearly a lose-lose situation for all the parties involved. So you would not want to get into a clash of tariffs. Second is you would want to sustain some of the benefits of trade and commerce and people-to-people interaction between India and US to continue. So it's a strategy that will probably play out over the course of next 4 years, and we hope that India, under the leadership of PM Modi, probably will leverage that to the fullest extent possible.
Right. Mithali, Vivek is saying the tariffs are a lose-lose proposition. I'm sure, if nothing else, Donald Trump, as a businessman, understands this. So is negotiation the real tactic being deployed when we talk about tariffs, or is there real economic merit in US trying to impose tariffs?
So first of all, hi Karthik. Nice to have you. Nice to be on the show. I think today, of course, tariffs are the number one agenda. Trade is the number one agenda, and I think the case that Prime Minister Modi would be making for India, he is today representing the will of 1.4 billion people, and the US understands the benefits of engaging with India. I mean, over the last decade, we've seen US India ties only strengthen because the US has understood the power of the Indian consumer. The US has understood the soft power that comes from having, an investment in a country like India to counter, some of the forces in the region, especially in South Asia as well as East Asia and China. And the US has also understood the power of the defense ties that are there between the two countries. I mean, it's always been, starting from the very beginning. I remember there was a meeting that was held in 1994 between Rajiv Gandhi, Sam Pitroda, and the representatives of General Electric. And
Yeah.
they were negotiating a deal where the government of India would purchase equipment from GE for defense. And that was the time when Sam Pitroda actually went and said, you know what, please start outsourcing information technology to us. And that's really how the IT industry started. So I think over the last, 3 decades, and of course the last 10 years, we've been managing to work very well with the US counterparts. And today, the opportunity for Prime Minister Modi to make that case of the long term ties, of the defense buying potential of India, of the IT industry growing together, partnerships, and bringing that focus onto the long term nature of this relationship.
Right. Mithali, very interesting that you brought in the 1990s and the entire globalization era that kick-started around the period that you are mentioning. But Vivek, globalization seems to be a thing of the past. I think nation first is pretty much the foreign policy and the economic policy of nations, whether it is the US, whether it is China, whether it is India. So days of outsourcing in the America first sort of prophecy seem to be over right now. So I want to actually come primarily to the fact that if you're talking about technology deals to be signed, then these technology deals are largely going to happen by way of India getting access to technology to build for the world. But is that something that the US is going to be viable to as an option?
So yes, in part, I would agree to the fact that globalization is on a retreat, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. So COVID was a game changer from that perspective because it provided that platform for politicians to start looking inwards, not just in India but everywhere in the world. So there is this mini wave of deglobalization currently passing through, and every country will probably try and position themselves in this on the global trade map, depending upon their strengths. And from India's perspective, I think what probably matters more is the scale and the market opportunity that it provides. So outside US and outside China, and post COVID, there has also been the realization that one needs to not put all the eggs in the same basket,
Right.
and the China plus one strategy is something which is finding a lot many takers in the global supply chain.
Right.
So
But
India
let me
offers a natural.
let me just interrupt you for just a minute, Vivek. If you're talking about China plus one strategy, we've been talking about it for more than 2 years, 3 years perhaps now, and India was supposed to be the obvious beneficiary in the China plus one narrative. But apart from perhaps Apple being one success story that India has been able to demonstrate, we haven't really been beneficiaries of China plus one.
So these are tectonic shifts, Karthik. So they probably will not start manifesting in year one or year two.
Okay.
But from a US perspective, so our total trade engagement, if you see how US has been dominating us, put both exports and imports together,
Yeah.
the number or the share has actually been climbing up. So US probably in the total trade that India does in terms of merchandise occupies about one-fourth weight in terms of both exports and imports put together. And the
Right.
share has actually been rising.
Okay.
So, yes, you could say that probably the China plus one strategy has not really played out in the very short term. But if Donald Trump stays where he is over the
Yeah.
course of next 4 years, you could possibly accept, because he's not the same Donald Trump as he was in his first tenure.
Right.
He's now backed by a larger majority from inside his own government. So
Sure.
he'll have much greater flexibility to push through some of his ideas. And from a geostrategic perspective, I think probably both the countries, if you think in isolation, both US and India somewhere have the same problem of running a very high merchandise trade deficit with China.
That's right.
So while US has been extremely vocal about it, uh, India has also been vocal, but not to the extent, not to the belligerent extent that US has been. So India
Right.
hasn't
I
been
mean, I think
taking
eventually it comes down to bargaining power. How powerful are you?
right.
How large is your trade, and how easily you're
Correct.
able to impose something which is in your selfish interest as a nation. Mithali, I think what we understand right now is that that Donald Trump has China definitely in his crosshairs when he wants to talk about America first in the context of deglobalization and making America great again. But he has, you have to give it to the man, he has lived up to pretty much everything that he had stated he would do. He has done it by way of executive orders or by way of policy intervention. Now, another thing that he has been talking about is reciprocal tariffs. And while we understand that Prime Minister Modi is there to try and negotiate a way out of these reciprocal tariffs, but understanding whatever we do understand of Donald Trump over the last 1 month or so from what we have seen, he may still go ahead and impose reciprocal tariffs. If he were to do that, how massive an impact is it likely to be on India?
So, in fact, Karthik, just before coming on the show, we are actually launching a study to, look exactly
Okay.
at exactly this. What is going
Okay.
to be the quantitative impact of reciprocal tariffs on India's economy? And it's a
Right.
very complex question because, value chains are so integrated at this point in time across different products. And when we look at, of course, a number of custom duties have been relaxed this time, but that doesn't mean that they won't come into the ambit of reciprocal tariffs. So when we look at aluminium, steel, of course, those are areas where the US has gone ahead and said this is a 25% tariff for any country coming into the US selling to us. But on the other hand, when we look at other commodities, especially high tech products, the semiconductor industry, the electronics industry, when we look at even the tech, some of the raw materials that are coming in, even in the textiles and food processing industries, to that extent, some of the machinery which comes in has components which are made in the US, or we have to import from there. And then
Sure.
this again has an impact on our exports as well, because our exports are going to become more expensive
Right.
when they are sent to the US economy. So a
Absolutely.
very complex picture which we really need to quantify.
Right. Of course, it would be hard to quantify, and you're right. Our exports are going to become obviously that much more uncompetitive when they go outside the shores of India and enter US. But Vivek, I want to pose this one last question to you. Right now, India enjoys, if I remember correctly, a trade surplus of give or take about 32, 33 billion dollars with the US. Now, if things were to go south between trying and negotiating these tariffs with the United States, and if this trade surplus was to go into, let's say, a deficit territory, while I understand the current account deficit is going to take a much larger beating, but this 32 billion dollars of surplus, which may become perhaps at par if not a deficit, in the context of a 3.7 3.8 trillion dollar economy, how much of an impact is that for India's own economic growth?
Well, it's a hypothetical question, Karthik, and the impact obviously is going to be huge if you stick to what the essence of the question is. 2023 we had about 40 odd billion dollars of trade surplus with you. So if you want to make that zero completely, you have that 40 odd billion dollars of trade gap opening up potentially in 2025 or 2026. So whenever the impact comes. Is it something which is likely? Well, probably not, because at the heart of it, Trump is using tariffs as a tool to negotiate. So he doesn't really want tariffs to be imposed for the sake of it. The idea behind that is to start getting countries onto the negotiating table.
Right.
And in some sense, you could say that we probably have an early advantage here because we are the third nation to call upon the newly elected president.
Right.
So we'll have some early moving advantage here, early movers advantage here, and I would not tend to believe that whatever surplus that we are currently running with the US on the merchandise front will see a dramatic shift in the coming years. It might see a little bit of a tinkering here and there, which you could talk about some of the low volume items like, let's say, motorcycles and maybe some of the electronic components which could benefit
Sure.
key stakeholders in the US. For example, let's say Apple or maybe Tesla in terms of automobiles. So you
Right.
could have some of these positioning from our perspective, but a sea change in the overall trade numbers is unlikely to happen.
All right. Well, Mithali Nikore and Vivek Kumar, thank you so much for joining us on this very important story.